President Biden reportedly lost his temper with Ukrainian President Volodymir Zelensky in a phone call earlier in the summer. According to reporting from NBC, Biden called Zelensky following his approval of an additional $1 billion in aid for Ukraine, but grew impatient after Zelensky pressed for more.
The U.S. has funneled billions of dollars to Ukraine since the outset of its war with Russia, and there seems to be no signs of stopping anytime soon. Biden has, of course, signaled that the U.S. will aid the war-torn country indefinitely, as long as it takes. All told, Congress has allocated $65 billion for Ukraine since February. So this is interesting only to the extent that Biden got testy. It's hard to even imagine.
So here's I think the background that makes this so interesting. We've just come off of a week where 30 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus issued a letter that
100%.
A paragraph after paragraph just validating Joe Biden and his approach to Ukraine, saying that we should send every penny, saying that they all voted for all of the aid packages and that it's all a very, very good idea, except for maybe at some point, the goal here should be peace. That's the only thing the letter said. In response to that letter, there was all of this blowback. Pramila Jayapal, leader of the caucus, issued a clarification and then a complete and total retraction. And it's been basically blowing up ever since then. Okay, in the background of that, the accusations against the CPC letter have been that it's been anti-Biden, that any confines, any constraints at all on an unlimited blank check out the door to Ukraine is tantamount to saying, as someone just now said to me on Twitter, to throwing Ukrainian children in a river to be drowned, right? Like that is the level of discourse that exists right now. And now we have reporting that Joe Biden himself, it seems, offered some kind of pushback to Zelensky asking for more money after he had just received $1 billion in aid. So who are these people defending here who are criticizing this letter? Because Joe Biden himself...
I'm heartened to know that Joe Biden even had the impulse to suggest that maybe one day there will come some need to limit the funding of what Ukraine is doing. Not enough to change any policy or to publicly say anything yet. But even this we didn't know how he actually feels deep down about this. But you're right. It's exactly the same kind of careful caution, is there a limit, sentiment being expressed by those 30 members, progressive Democratic members of Congress, that they were forced humiliatingly to withdraw, forced by mainstream pressures, pro-Ukrainian pressures coming from the media and kind of just the mainstream of the Democratic Party. But Biden himself shares that sentiment privately, or did at one point express something like that, which you're not even allowed to. I mean, the discourse is just so pro. I mean, why don't you share? You interviewed someone. Why don't you talk about that?
I interviewed a guest who I really enjoyed having on my podcast earlier this year. He's an anti-nuclear proliferation expert, Joe Cirincione, formerly of the Plowshares Institute. He's a leftist. I believe he was an advisor to the Bernie foreign policy camp. You know, a guy who I think of as having very similar ideals, but after the brouhaha of the letter broke, I saw him online defending the retraction of the letter and being very critical of the letter. So I invited him to come on my show so we could have a good faith conversation about how we ended up on opposite sides of this issue, despite, I thought, having very similar views about foreign policy and being anti-American imperialism and things going into it. And it's gotten me into some real hot water. I want to play a clip for you guys right now.
If you really believed, like I do and have been arguing for weeks, that Democrats are setting Tulsi up to make that exact argument, I can't be mad at Tulsi. Tulsi didn't say a single untrue thing there.
Are you kidding me? It's one lie after the other. What are you talking about?
Name a lie.
Warmongers. Warmongers. The Democratic Party is controlled by warmongers?
We're leftists. We obviously know and believe that the Democratic Party is controlled by warmongers. The deep state knows no D or our party affiliation. Wait, this is like not even a controversial statement.
She even lies about the name of the party.
The whole point of why we loved Bernie Sanders.
She calls it the Democrat Party.
I don't care. I'm not a Democrat.
It's an insult.
I don't care.
So this
amazing.
This is where we are. I had just played the clip of Tulsi, I think on Tucker Carlson, making the point that Democrats have set her up to make, that there is no room for even the tiniest bit of anti-war criticism or any conversation about what limits might be to Ukrainian aid or whether or not our aid should be contingent on peace negotiations, given the fact that we have reporting that Boris Johnson intentionally tried to thwart those negotiations earlier this year, right? Despite the fact that we have all of this knowledge now about America's involvement in the region and the coup in 2014, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Despite all of our fingers in these pots in various ways, the idea that the money should have any push toward peace
I watched
is insane.
that and the other clip where he sort of accuses you of like being okay with children dying in Ukraine or something.
Yes.
And I mean, I don't think you're personally holding them underwater to drown, but it's something like that. And you say that you don't accept that because, well, children are dying everywhere. There's all sorts of...
Yes.
And I think that just gets to such a fundamental point because it would be different. From my point of view, it actually would be different if the administration would just say, look, we view Russia as an antagonistic nation and keeping Ukraine's integrity is a strategic priority of ours. So this isn't just like any other fight anywhere else.
Yeah.
From a real politics standpoint, we want Russia to lose and we want Ukraine to stand firm and better. And we would fight them over this, but our soldiers don't even have to fight. Ukrainian soldiers are fighting and dying for this, so we'll continue to fund it because it's in our best interest, and you have to live with that. Yeah. That would be honest if they said that, because that's their actual view.
That's their actual view.
But they're not saying it. They're couching in this language of humanitarian concern, and oh no, it's so sad, and we have to. That's just admit the truth.
Yeah,
and let the American people know that, and see if they agree with that strategic priority, and then proceed. Then proceed with all the public will you have over it.
100%. Again, from the beginning of this conflict, when I talked to Matt Duss on the podcast, who was Bernie's foreign policy advisor until recently, I didn't know much about the conflict at all. All I wanted to know is why Ukraine? Yep. Why the investment in Ukraine? And nobody has been able to answer that question, because if they were to be honest, I mean, it's been interesting because in this interview, Joe does say some things about how, we're not allowed to change people's borders. In Europe, he qualifies it as in Europe. And many people wrote in and called in to my call-in last night saying, since when? Is this a policy? Since when? America has been involved in this kind of regime change, border change operation. They talked about the Gulf War and Kuwait. It's a new rule that's come up to justify an involvement here. What this really is a continuation of Cold War policies where we don't want to see Russian economic dominance, and we want to have that kind of control. We don't want a multipolar state. Right. I may or may not agree with that goal, but just be honest about that being the goal, because that is the why Ukraine of it all. And don't then turn around and tell people who believe that the money is not being spent in a way that makes any sense given the economic climate back home, that they're being crazy or that they just don't care about Ukrainian lives and Ukrainian children, especially when Ukrainian people are being used as cannon fodder to prolong a conflict to weaken Russia instead of being targeted to actually win discrete goals that are driven by the self-determination of the people who live in Ukraine.
Borders in Europe have changed constantly, including recent. Hasn't been a long period of
Yugoslavia. We did all that border finagling, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it's all this post hoc rationalization. People can see through it, but at the end of the day, it's working on a big chunk of the population. We'll see if it has any effect here on Democrats' chances.
They think it's just the risk board, and you're not going to get the 5 new troop deployments if you don't have all of Europe under the Green Army.
Of course, Robby's going to make this about a board game somehow.
Yes, that is my specialty. Tomorrow on Rising, reporter Lee Fong will join us to discuss his latest report. This really big story on the Department of Homeland Security putting pressure on social media companies to censor. I was just seeing that he was on Tucker's show last night, and Aaron Rupar, who's this kind of liberal Twitter personality, used to be a kind of enforcer for mainstream media orthodoxy, tweeted a screenshot of it with can you believe it is on Tucker?
How could they?
Why isn't he everywhere? Isn't this a story of interest to liberals as well? Why isn't he on CNN and MSNBC as well?
Well, he'll be on Rising tomorrow, so make sure that you follow us. And as always, like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who prefer to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. And you can check us out on Roku and other streaming devices as well. Take care.
See you tomorrow.